Most people who are emotionally unavailable do not think of themselves that way. That is the part almost nobody says out loud. We picture emotional unavailability as something obvious. Someone who ghosts, someone who is clearly avoiding commitment, someone who tells you directly they're not looking for anything serious. But the far more common version is quieter than that and much harder to see from the inside. Because it doesn't look like refusing love, it looks like wanting love while unconsciously making sure it never fully arrives. If you've ever wondered why your relationships keep hitting the same invisible ceiling, why closeness always seems to plateau right before it deepens into something real, this video is going to walk you through 7 honest signs that you might be the one who is emotionally unavailable, even while genuinely believing you want connection more than anything. Before we get into the signs themselves, I want to explain why this matters so much, because there is a version of self-reflection that turns into self-punishment, and that is not what this is about. Emotional availability isn't a fixed trait you either have or don't have. It is closer to a skill, or maybe more accurately, a set of nervous system patterns that were shaped long before you had any say in the matter. Usually in childhood, in response to whatever emotional environment you grew up in. Recognizing unavailability in yourself is not a confession of being broken. It is information. And information is the only thing that actually lets you change a pattern instead of repeating it indefinitely, while feeling confused about why the same thing keeps happening with different people. Sign number 1 is that you fall for potential instead of reality. You get intensely attracted to who someone could become. The version of them that finally opens up, finally commits fully, finally becomes exactly what you need, rather than staying grounded in who they actually are right now in front of you, with all their current limitations. This is one of the most common and least discussed forms of emotional unavailability, because it disguises itself as hope and optimism rather than avoidance. But functionally, chasing potential instead of reality keeps you permanently oriented toward a future version of the relationship, rather than being present in the actual one, which means you never have to fully show up for what is real because you are always emotionally living slightly ahead of it. This particular sign is worth sitting with a bit longer than the others because it is often the hardest one to recognize from the inside. Precisely because it feels like optimism and generosity toward another person rather than a form of self-protection. The tell is usually in how you respond when someone's actual current behavior contradicts the potential you've built up in your mind. If disappointment in those moments gets quickly explained away, rationalized, or reframed as a temporary setback rather than genuine information about who the person is right now, that is usually a sign that the potential has become more important to you than the reality, which is exactly the substitution that keeps you safely one step removed from full presence in the relationship as it actually exists today. Sign number 2 is that you feel most drawn to people after they've pulled away, not before. If your interest reliably spikes the moment someone becomes less available, less responsive, less certain, and reliably fades the moment someone becomes consistently warm and reliable, that is worth sitting with honestly. This pattern often develops as a protective mechanism. Consistent available love can feel oddly threatening to a nervous system that never learned to trust it, because it demands that you actually show up and be seen in return, with no ambiguity left to hide behind. Distance, on the other hand, keeps things safely uncertain, which paradoxically feels more comfortable to a system wired around avoiding real exposure. Sign number 3 is that you struggle to sit with someone else's vulnerability without deflecting it. When a partner shares something genuinely difficult, a fear, an insecurity, a need, do you find yourself changing the subject, making a joke, offering a quick solution, instead of just staying present with the feeling, or subtly withdrawing right after they open up? This is a strong indicator of unavailability, because true emotional availability isn't only about your own willingness to share. It is equally about your capacity to receive someone else's openness without needing to immediately manage or escape the discomfort it creates in you. Sign number 4, and this one surprises people, is that you are the one who initiates the depth and then panics when it is reciprocated. Some people move quickly toward emotional intensity early on, deep conversations, intense declarations, fast intimacy, and then feel a wave of anxiety the moment the other person matches that intensity and starts relying on it. This looks like the opposite of unavailability on the surface, because you were the one who went deep first. But the pattern reveals itself in what happens next. A subtle retreat once the relationship actually requires you to sustain what you initiated rather than just experience the high of creating it. Sign number 5 is keeping a mental exit door open at all times, even in relationships that are going well. This shows up as things like never fully deleting dating apps, even when things are serious, maintaining charged connections with other people as a kind of emotional backup, or noticing that some part of you is always quietly evaluating whether this is really the best option available, rather than being fully invested in the one in front of you. This isn't about literal infidelity. It is about a psychological unwillingness to close the exit, because closing it means fully committing to the risk of loss. Sign number 6 is that you interpret a partner's normal needs as being too much. If a partner wanting slightly more communication, more quality time, more reassurance than you are currently offering, gets internally labeled as clingy or needy, rather than being recognized as a completely reasonable request that you may simply be unable or unwilling to meet, that is worth examining. Often this reaction isn't actually about the partner's needs being unreasonable at all. It is about those needs asking something of you that feels uncomfortable to provide, and it is much easier to reframe the request as excessive than to sit with your own limitation. Honestly, sign number 7, the one that ties everything together, is that you feel a strange relief rather than sadness when a relationship ends, even one you were genuinely fond of. If your dominant emotional response to a breakup tends to be something closer to freedom than genuine grief, even in relationships that look good on paper and had no obvious deal breaker, that relief is data. It often indicates that some part of you was holding the relationship at arm's length the entire time, managing your own exposure rather than being fully in it, which means the ending doesn't cost you what a truly present investment would have cost. Now here is the part that actually matters, which is where this comes from and what to do about it. Emotional unavailability in adults is very rarely a character flaw. It is overwhelmingly a learned protection strategy, most often built in childhood environments where emotional needs were met inconsistently, where a caregiver's love felt conditional on performance or mood, or where emotional expression, yours or someone else's, led to unpredictable or overwhelming outcomes. A child in that environment learns an extremely logical, if costly, lesson. Full emotional investment is dangerous because it exposes you to disappointment or overwhelm you can't control. So they learn to keep one foot out the door in every close relationship going forward. Not because they don't want connection, but because full connection was never modeled as something safe. The good news, and this is genuinely good news, is that this pattern is not permanent because it was learned rather than innate, which means it can be unlearned through repeated, deliberate practice rather than through insight alone. Insight is where it starts, but insight by itself rarely changes behavior, which is why so many people can accurately diagnose their own patterns in a video like this one and still repeat them in their very next relationship. Here is where the actual change happens. Start by noticing in real time the specific moment when you feel the urge to create distance, whether that is mentally checking out during a vulnerable conversation, reaching for your phone. The second things get emotionally intense, or feeling that flicker of relief when plans with a partner get canceled. You don't need to fight the urge immediately. You just need to notice it and name it internally, because naming a pattern while it is happening is the first step toward eventually having a choice about it, instead of it running automatically outside your awareness second. Practice staying present for slightly longer than feels comfortable in moments of vulnerability, both your own and your partner's. This doesn't mean forcing intensity you are not ready for. It means the next time a partner shares something difficult, resisting the urge to immediately deflect with humor or advice, and instead simply staying quiet and present for an extra 10 or 15 seconds before responding. That small window is where the actual nervous system retraining happens, because you are proving to yourself in real time that staying present with someone else's vulnerability doesn't destroy you. Third, and this is the hardest one, practice choosing consistency over intensity when picking who you invest in. If you notice yourself consistently more drawn to unpredictable, unavailable dynamics, than to steady, reliable ones that is worth deliberately working against, even though it will feel less exciting at first. Nervous systems calibrated around avoidance often mistake calm safety for boredom, simply because it is unfamiliar, not because it is actually lacking anything. I want to go a little deeper on why the first practice, simply receiving a compliment without deflecting it, works as well as it does. Because on the surface it sounds almost too small to matter for something as significant as a lifelong relational pattern. The reason it works is that emotional patterns like this one are maintained largely through thousands of tiny, repeated moments rather than through a small number of large ones. Every time you deflect a compliment, minimize a kind gesture, or mentally argue against evidence that you are valued, you are in a small way reinforcing the underlying belief that drives the unavailability in the first place. And every time you instead let a compliment land, simply say thank you and resist the urge to immediately correct or downplay it. You are casting a small vote for a different belief. No single vote changes anything on its own, but patterns are built and rebuilt through accumulation. And the accumulation of thousands of small votes in a new direction is genuinely how these deeply ingrained responses eventually shift. It is also worth talking about what tends to happen in the early stages of trying to change this pattern, because the process is rarely smooth or linear, and knowing that in advance prevents a lot of unnecessary discouragement. Many people who begin practicing emotional availability more deliberately report an initial period where things actually feel worse before they feel better. A heightened awareness of their own deflection, a kind of uncomfortable self-consciousness around vulnerability that wasn't there when the pattern was running entirely on autopilot. This is not evidence that the practice isn't working. It is evidence that you've moved from an unconscious pattern to a conscious one, which is genuinely the necessary first step, even though the conscious version can feel clumsier and more effortful than the smooth, automatic unavailability you are used to. Change of this kind tends to follow a predictable arc: unconscious incompetence, where the pattern runs without your awareness, followed by conscious incompetence, where you notice the pattern but still struggle to interrupt it, followed eventually by conscious competence, where you can deliberately choose differently with real effort, and only much later by unconscious competence, where the new, healthier pattern starts to run automatically the way the old one used to. Most people give up during the conscious incompetence stage, mistaking the discomfort of that stage for evidence that the change isn't taking hold, when in fact it is exactly the stage that has to be passed through on the way to lasting change. I also want to address a specific version of this pattern that shows up often and gets overlooked, which is emotional unavailability that hides behind an appearance of being extremely emotionally expressive. Some people talk about their feelings constantly, share openly, seem, on the surface, like the opposite of emotionally guarded, while still maintaining a version of unavailability that operates underneath all that expression. This looks like sharing feelings freely, but never actually letting a partner's response to those feelings change anything, discussing vulnerability as a kind of performance or a way of appearing self-aware, while remaining fundamentally closed off to actually being influenced, comforted, or changed by another person's presence in response. If you recognize this in yourself, the 7 signs above may not have landed as directly, because on the surface you don't look like someone who avoids emotional topics. But the underlying pattern, difficulty actually receiving rather than just discussing, can be identical, simply wearing a more articulate disguise. I want to touch on one more thing before we close, because it directly affects how useful this whole video actually is to you. There is a difference between reading a list like this one and genuinely metabolizing it. And the difference usually comes down to what you do in the next 24 hours after watching. Most people watch a video like this, feel a flash of recognition, maybe even discomfort, and then return to their normal patterns within a day because nothing concrete was put in place to interrupt the automatic behavior. If even one of these 7 signs genuinely resonated, I'd encourage you to pick a single, specific, small moment in the next day or two where you can practice the opposite response. Staying present for an extra few seconds during someone else's vulnerability, actually receiving a compliment without deflecting it, noticing the urge to keep a mental exit door open, and simply naming that urge to yourself without acting on it. The specificity matters enormously here. A vague intention to be more emotionally available rarely survives contact with an actual moment of discomfort, while a small, specific, pre-decided practice is something you can actually execute when the moment arrives. I also want to acknowledge something that tends to go unspoken in conversations like this one, which is the grief that sometimes surfaces when you recognize these patterns clearly for the first time. It is not uncommon to feel a wave of sadness, not just about relationships that ended because of this pattern, but about years spent unconsciously protecting yourself from a kind of closeness you actually wanted the whole time. That grief is worth making space for rather than rushing past. It is not a sign that something has gone wrong in your process of self-understanding. It is often a sign that the recognition has actually landed at a real felt level rather than staying purely intellectual, and that felt recognition tends to be exactly what is required for the pattern to actually start shifting, rather than simply being understood abstractly while continuing to run unchanged underneath. If any of these 7 signs landed uncomfortably close to home, I want you to know that recognizing them is not a verdict on your worth or your capacity for love. It is the exact starting point every person who eventually builds a securely attached relationship had to pass through first, because nobody arrives at real emotional availability by accident. It is built deliberately, one uncomfortable moment of staying present at a time. That underlying theme, more than the specific checklist, is what is actually worth tracking as you move through your own relationships going forward, because it will keep showing up in new disguises, in new relationships, with new people even after you've addressed the specific patterns named here today. And that ongoing resonance is exactly what is worth paying attention to. It is worth remembering, too, that the 7 signs covered here are not meant to function as a diagnostic checklist where you need to identify with all of them to take any of this seriously. Most people recognize themselves clearly in 2 or 3 of these patterns and not at all in the others. And that is completely normal because emotional unavailability doesn't show up identically in every person. What matters more than how many signs you checked off is whether the underlying theme, a tendency to protect yourself from full emotional exposure even while wanting closeness, resonates at all, because that underlying theme is the actual thing worth working on, regardless of which specific behaviors it happens to show up through in your particular case. One final note worth adding, because it changes how I'd like you to hold everything you just watched. Emotional availability is not a fixed destination you either reach or fail to reach. It is closer to a practice you return to again and again, sometimes successfully, sometimes not, over the entire course of a relationship, not just in its early stages. Even people who have done significant work on this pattern still notice, occasionally, the old urge to deflect, to keep an exit open, to interpret a partner's normal need as excessive. The goal was never to eliminate that urge permanently. It was to build enough awareness that the urge no longer runs the show by default, which is a genuinely different and far more achievable target than the idea of becoming a completely different, permanently secure person overnight. Next week, we're covering what secure attachment actually looks like day to day, not in theory, but in the small, unglamorous moments that make it real, so you have a concrete picture of what you are actually working towards.